when 4 Americans were trapped and dying in an Afghan valley. 21-year-old Marine Dakota Meyer disobeyed direct orders and drove into the kill zone 5 times to save them. Because sometimes, the difference between a hero and a coward is the willingness to drive straight into hell when your brothers need you most. Welcome to Untold Heroes Stories. Which state are you watching from? We'd love to hear your military stories in the comments. The Medal of Honor stories told on this channel are completely true. Sources are in the description. Now, let's continue. Dakota Lewis Meyer was born on June 26, 1988, in Columbia, Kentucky, a small town in the rolling hills of Appalachia. He grew up in a working-class family where service to country was considered both an honor and a duty. Like many young men in rural Kentucky, Dakota learned early that hard work, loyalty, and doing what's right mattered more than personal comfort. The September 11th attacks occurred when Dakota was just 13 years old, and like many young Americans of his generation, those images left an indelible mark on his worldview. He knew he wanted to serve his country in uniform. In 2006, at age 18, Dakota enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. He was drawn to the Marines' reputation for being the toughest, most elite fighting force in the American military. The Marines' motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, resonated deeply with Dakota's personal values. After completing basic training at Parris Island and advanced infantry training, Dakota was assigned to the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, stationed in Hawaii. He specialized as a scout sniper, a role that required exceptional marksmanship skills, patience, and the ability to operate independently in dangerous situations. In 2008, Dakota deployed to Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The deployment gave him his first taste of combat operations, though the fighting in Iraq was winding down. Most of his time was spent on routine patrols and security operations. In 2009, Dakota's unit deployed to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. The mission was to work with Afghan National Army forces to establish security in remote areas of Kunar province along the Pakistan border. This was some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan, where Taliban and Al-Qaeda fighters had deep roots and significant local support. Dakota was assigned to work as part of an embedded training team tasked with mentoring Afghan forces and providing security for development projects. The area around Forward Operating Base Joyce was particularly hostile, with mountainous terrain providing excellent cover for enemy fighters. On September 8, 2009, Dakota was assigned to provide overwatch security for a mission into the Ganjgal Valley, a remote area near the Pakistan border. The mission was to meet with village elders and assess the feasibility of establishing a new Afghan National Army outpost in the valley. The mission team consisted of American trainers and Afghan National Army soldiers who would conduct the meeting, and overwatch teams positioned on high ground to provide security. Dakota was assigned to one of the overwatch positions, approximately 8,000 meters from the meeting site. At 6 a.m., the meeting team entered the Ganjgal Valley. The team included Staff Sergeant Aaron Kennefick, Corporal Michael Skusa, Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class James Layton, and several Afghan National Army soldiers, accompanied by an Afghan interpreter and village officials. For the first few hours, everything proceeded normally. The meeting team established contact with village elders and began their assessment. Dakota and his fellow Marines maintained their vigilance, scanning the surrounding terrain for enemy activity. At approximately 9 a.m., everything went wrong. The meeting team had been lured into a carefully planned ambush. Taliban fighters had positioned themselves throughout the valley, using high ground and natural cover to create a kill zone that would be nearly impossible to escape. When the attack began, it came from multiple directions simultaneously. The initial barrage was devastating. Taliban fighters opened fire with automatic weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, and mortars. The meeting team was caught in the open with minimal cover and no easy escape route. The Afghan National Army soldiers, poorly trained and terrified, immediately began to flee. Dakota, monitoring from his overwatch position, could hear desperate radio calls from the meeting team. Staff Sergeant Kennefick was trying to coordinate defense while calling for immediate support. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the radio transmissions. "We need immediate support," Kennefick radioed. "We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. We have wounded and need medevac now." Dakota's commanding officers, monitoring the situation, quickly assessed the tactical situation. The enemy fire was too intense and well coordinated for a successful rescue operation. The decision was made to call in air support and artillery fire to suppress the enemy while the meeting team attempted to withdraw. Negative on ground support. came the radio response. "Air assets are en route. Maintain your positions and provide overwatch fire." But Dakota could hear something in the radio transmissions that his commanders couldn't. The increasing desperation in his fellow Marines' voices. These weren't just tactical updates. They were the sounds of men who were dying. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Dakota made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Despite direct orders to maintain his position, he left his overwatch post and began making his way toward the valley floor. His plan was simple: find a vehicle, drive into the kill zone, and extract his fellow Marines. Dakota's first challenge was finding transportation. The nearest vehicle was an up-armored Humvee parked at a small outpost about a mile from his position. Moving carefully but quickly, Dakota made his way to the outpost. The Afghan National Army soldiers stationed there were terrified and reluctant to get involved in what they saw as a hopeless mission. Finally, Dakota found an Afghan sergeant named Hafez who was willing to help. Hafez understood the situation and agreed to drive the Humvee while Dakota operated the mounted machine gun. At approximately 11 a.m., Dakota and Hafez began their first trip into the Ganjgal Valley. The route took them directly through the Taliban kill zone, where enemy fighters had prepared defensive positions specifically to prevent rescue attempts. As soon as they entered the valley, Taliban fighters opened fire. Bullets struck the armor plating and ricocheted off the windows. Dakota, manning the .50 caliber machine gun, began returning fire at muzzle flashes among the rocks and trees. The fighting was intense and chaotic. Dakota had to identify enemy positions while trying to locate the missing Americans. Radio communications were sporadic due to terrain and enemy jamming. During their first trip, Dakota and Hafez were able to locate and extract several wounded Afghan National Army soldiers. They loaded the wounded into the Humvee and began the dangerous journey back to safety. The return trip was even more perilous, as Taliban fighters had adjusted their positions to better target the vehicle. By the time they reached safety, Dakota realized the mission was far from over. Radio transmissions from the meeting team had become increasingly desperate, and it was clear that not all Americans had been found. Against the advice of his commanders, and despite the extreme danger, Dakota decided to make a second trip into the valley. This time, he was joined by Staff Sergeant Juan Rodriguez Chavez, who had volunteered to help with the rescue operation. The second trip was even more dangerous than the first. Taliban fighters had now had time to adjust their positions and coordinate their fire. The Humvee came under sustained attack from multiple directions, with rocket-propelled grenades exploding nearby and automatic weapons fire constantly striking the vehicle. During this trip, Dakota and his team were able to locate and extract additional wounded personnel. They also recovered important intelligence materials and equipment that couldn't be allowed to fall into enemy hands. By this time, Dakota had been fighting continuously for several hours. He was exhausted, dehydrated, and operating on pure adrenaline. The constant stress of combat, combined with the emotional weight of knowing that his fellow Marines were still in danger, was taking its toll. But Dakota was not finished. Over the next several hours, he would make 3 more trips into the valley, each time facing increasingly organized and effective enemy resistance. The Taliban had realized that someone was conducting rescue operations and had begun concentrating their fire on likely approach routes. During his third trip, Dakota was accompanied by Captain Will Swenson, an Army officer who had also volunteered for the rescue mission. Together, they were able to locate and extract more wounded personnel, including several who would not have survived without immediate medical attention. The fourth trip was perhaps the most dangerous of all. By this time, the Taliban had brought in reinforcements and had positioned fighters specifically to target any rescue vehicles. Dakota and his team came under sustained fire from the moment they entered the valley until they exited. But it was during Dakota's 5th and final trip into the valley that he accomplished his most important mission: recovering the bodies of the 4 Americans who had been killed in the ambush. Staff Sergeant Aaron Kennefic, Corporal Michael Skusa, Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class James Layton, and their Afghan interpreter had all died during the initial ambush. Their bodies had been left in the valley, and Dakota was determined not to leave them behind. The recovery operation was emotionally devastating. Dakota had known these men personally. They had served together, lived together, and shared the bonds that only combat veterans understand. Seeing their bodies and knowing that he had been unable to save them was a trauma that would affect him for years. But Dakota's commitment to the military principle of leave no one behind was absolute. Despite the extreme danger and his own physical and emotional exhaustion, he loaded his fallen comrades into the Humvee and brought them home. By the time the Ganjgal Valley battle ended, Dakota had spent more than 6 hours in continuous combat. He had made 5 trips into an active kill zone, extracted 36 wounded personnel, killed at least 8 Taliban fighters, and recovered the bodies of 4 fallen Americans. The immediate aftermath of the battle was chaotic. Dakota was physically and emotionally drained, but there was little time for rest. Casualty reports had to be filed, intelligence had to be processed, and the wounded had to be evacuated to medical facilities. But Dakota's most difficult challenge was yet to come, dealing with the psychological trauma of the day's events. He had witnessed the deaths of men he considered brothers, had been forced to make life and death decisions under extreme pressure, and had seen levels of violence that would haunt him for years. The official investigation into the Ganjgal Valley ambush would later reveal serious failures in planning, intelligence, and command decision-making. The meeting team had been sent into a known danger area without adequate support, and the initial response to the ambush had been inadequate. But Dakota's actions during the battle were universally praised. His willingness to disobey direct orders in order to save his fellow Marines demonstrated the kind of moral courage that the military's highest decorations are designed to recognize. On September 15, 2011, President Barack Obama awarded Dakota Meyer the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the White House. At 23 years old, Dakota became the youngest living recipient of the Medal of Honor since the Vietnam War and the first Marine to receive the decoration in 38 years. The Medal of Honor citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with Marine Embedded Training Team 2-8, Regional Corps Advisory Command 3-7 in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, on August 9, 2009. But for Dakota, the Medal of Honor was both an honor and a burden. While he was proud to represent his fellow Marines and to bring attention to their sacrifices, he struggled with being singled out for actions that he considered simply doing his job. The transition from active duty to civilian life was difficult for Dakota. Like many combat veterans, he dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder, survivor's guilt, and the challenge of finding meaning in civilian pursuits after the intense purpose of military service. Dakota became an advocate for veterans' rights and mental health awareness. He spoke openly about his own struggles with PTSD and worked to reduce the stigma surrounding mental health treatment for veterans. His willingness to discuss these issues publicly helped other veterans seek the help they needed. In 2012, Dakota published a memoir titled Into the Fire, a first-hand account of the most extraordinary battle in the Afghan War, which provided a detailed account of the Ganjgal Valley battle and its aftermath. The book was both a tribute to his fallen comrades and an honest examination of the psychological costs of modern warfare. Dakota also became involved in various business ventures and philanthropic activities. He founded a construction company in Kentucky and worked to provide job opportunities for other veterans. He also supported various charities focused on veteran welfare and military family support. Throughout his post-military career, Dakota has remained committed to honoring the memory of his fallen comrades from the Ganjgal Valley. He has spoken at numerous memorial services and has worked to ensure that their sacrifices are not forgotten by the American public. Today, Dakota Meyer's story serves as both an inspiration and a sobering reminder of the costs of modern warfare. His actions in Afghanistan demonstrated the highest levels of courage and commitment to his fellow Marines, but they also illustrate the long-term psychological challenges that many veterans face. The Medal of Honor that Dakota received was not just recognition for his individual heroism, but also a symbol of the sacrifices made by all the men and women who serve in America's military forces. His willingness to risk his life to save his comrades exemplifies the military values of honor, courage, and commitment that define the American warrior ethos. For young Americans considering military service, Dakota Meyer's example shows both the potential for heroism and the reality of sacrifice that military service entails. His story reminds us that heroes are not born, but are made through the choices they make when faced with impossible situations. The Ganjgal Valley battle occurred more than a decade ago, but its lessons remain relevant today. Dakota's willingness to disobey orders in order to save lives demonstrates that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to do what's right rather than what's easy or safe. Most importantly, Dakota Meyer's story reminds us that the greatest acts of heroism are often motivated not by a desire for glory, but by love for one's fellow human beings. His 5 trips into the kill zone were not about personal recognition, but about the simple principle that no American should be left behind. In an era when military service is often viewed as a career choice rather than a calling, Dakota Meyer represents the timeless ideals of selfless service and sacrifice for others. His Medal of Honor stands as a testament to the courage that ordinary Americans can display when extraordinary circumstances demand it. Dakota Meyer's legacy is not just his Medal of Honor, but the lives he saved and the example he set for future generations of American warriors. His story proves that sometimes the greatest act of courage is the simple decision to drive straight into hell when your brothers need you most.